Chapter 4 review. This is taking problems from the chapter review and the chapter test, page 243 all the way to page 246. Don't forget to study your flashcards. There's not a lot of them for this chapter. Moving on to 6 through 9 where we're graphing inequalities. The variables on the left, so I can use the inequality direction to match my arrowhead too. So I need an open circle at 3 since there's no or equal to. And it would go in that direction. M is less than or equal to -5 since there's that or equal to on there right here. I am going to use the darkened dot, and less than is in this direction again. That arrowhead matching the inequality direction only works if the variable is on the left. So I'm going to rewrite this one so that my variable is on the left. Notice the pointy part was towards the P. So I'm going to rewrite it where the pointy part is towards the P. And so I need a darkened dot at 10. And that is not very neat. Let's try that again. Darkened dot at 10. And we're going to go this direction. And then R is less than 2.5. So here's 2.5. And it is an open circle. Make that a little smaller. And then we're going to go this way. And again, using that open circle because it's just less than. So if we have less than or greater than, we use an open circle. And if we have the or equals to on them, we use a darkened dot or a filled circle. And here, number 10, we have an open circle at -2. And it goes in that direction. So remember, our arrowhead matches our inequality if we write our variable on the left. So writing our variable on the left, inequality goes this way. It's a darkened dot, so I put that, and it's at -3.5 or -3.5. X, it goes this way. At -6, it's an open circle, so there's no or equal to there. That is not there. That would be X is greater than or equal to 2. On this one, X is less than or equal to 4.5 or 4.5. And on this one, X is greater than 1.5. Number 14, here we have to define a variable and write an inequality. At least 600 people attended the play. So we can say the number of people attending, or just simply the number of people, and that was at least, which means greater than or equal to. Remember, at least, we use greater than or equal to, and at most, we use less than or equal to. Those are in your flashcards. Any elevator can carry at most 15 people, so I'm going to use that same variable again, and the number of people on the elevator has to be less than or equal to 15 because it can carry at most 15. And then finally the temperature, so I'm going to say T is the temp, and it was less than 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's what that one would look like. Moving on to these, we're going to solve the inequality, showing our work, write the solution with the variable listed first in the blank, and then graph the solution. On this one, I need to subtract 3 from both sides because I have h plus 3, and the opposite of adding 3 is subtracting 3. And since we have a +2 and a -3, we find the difference and keep the sign of the larger. So it's h is greater than -1. So we're going to have an open circle at -1, and our arrowhead's going to go that way. On number 18, I have t minus 4. So the opposite of subtracting 4 is adding 4. You have a +4 and a -9. So we're going to have -5. Find the difference and keep the sign of the larger. So open circle at -5 and going this way. In number 8 or 19, we need to divide both sides by 8. And we have m is greater than or equal to -3. And so we want a darkened dot at -3, and we will draw our arrow in that direction. And we do not change the direction of the inequality because even though we divided and got a negative, we did not divide by a negative, we divided by a positive. So far, we haven't had to change the direction of our inequality because we have not multiplied or divided by a negative, but that happens right here. When we divide by a negative or multiply by a negative, we have to change the direction of our inequality. So we're going to have W is greater than or equal to -2. So we will put a darkened dot at -2 and it will go this way. On this one, I'm going to subtract 0.5 from both sides. Remember to line up your decimal. Your decimal is right there on that. So I'm going to get Q is greater than the 2 and the 0.5 are both negative. So it's going to be -2.5. And increasing my scale there so that you can see that is going to be right there in between the 2 and the 3. It's a little hard to do on this small graph, but I want an open circle and I'm going in this direction. Moving on to number 22, we need to add 8 to both sides. And when we do that, we have a +8 and a -22. So we need to find the difference, which would be 22 minus 8 would be 14. And we're going to keep the sign of the larger. And that creates a problem. With your graph, I will have to fix that, put in a graph here that has -14 on it. And you would need a darkened dot at 14. Nope, open circle at 14. So let me change colors. Open circle at 14 and heading that way. Moving on to 23, to get rid of this fraction, which is essentially multiplying by 3 and dividing by 5, I'm going to do the reciprocal. I'm going to multiply by 5 and divide by 3, or multiply by 5/3. And I'm going to do a -5/3, and that's because a negative times a negative would give me a positive. Here, that's -9/1, so 3 will go into -9, -3 times. So I have here in, and since I multiplied by a negative, I'm going to change the direction of my inequality. I have -3 times -5, which would be 15. And again, I'll have to fix the number line on yours. At 15, you're going to want a darkened dot since it's or equal to, and we're going to go in that direction. And then on number 24, we are going to do the same thing, multiplying by 8/5, the reciprocal of that fraction. And here the 5 will cancel, 2 will go into 8 4 times. Over here, everything cancels. And so we end up with D is greater than or equal to 4. And so we just need a darkened dot at 4 and an arrow that way. And I forgot to write my answer in the blank in both of these. On this one, I subtract 2 from both sides and I get this, but we want to write our inequality with our variable on the left. So we are going to move the variable to the left. The inequality currently opens to the variable, and so that's how I want to open it. And so we need a darkened dot at -2 and heading in this direction. Number 26, divide both sides by 4. We get 0 divided by 4 is 0. and we need to change the direction of that inequality. Did I write that one up in there? Yes, I did. And then, so for our graph, we would have an open circle at 0 and going this way. Here, I'm going to add 2.8 to both sides. Remember to line up your decimals. Now, when we do this, our 2.8 is positive, our 0.3 is negative, so we need to find the difference between the two. And that would be 2.5, and we would keep the sign of the larger. We need to rewrite our inequality so that the variable is on the left. Again, the pointy side is to the u. We want the pointy side to the u. So we are going to do a darkened dot at 2.5 and go that way. Number 28, to get rid of this negative 1/3, I'm going to multiply by negative 3 over 1 or just negative 3, however you want to look at that. They are the same thing. So I get negative 9, change the direction of the inequality because I multiplied by a negative, is less than p. So when we rewrite this so that we can draw it easier, we have p is greater than negative 9. So an open circle at negative 9 and going that way. Moving on to the next page, we have multi-step inequalities, and we won't be graphing these. So subtract 5. The 1 and 5 are both negative, so I'm going to add them up and keep the sign. Then divide by 3, and we get n is greater than negative 2. Again, I do not change the direction of the inequality because I divided by a positive 3. Add 1 to both sides. On this one, we have a negative 3 and a positive 1, so we're going to have a negative 2. Divide by 4, and k is less than or equal to negative 1/2. Negative 2 over 4 reduces to negative 1/2. Let's write that a little neater. Moving down, number 33, we're going to multiply by 8/5. On the left, everything will cancel. On the right, the 5 will go into the 25 5 times. And so we will end up with b is less than 40. And we are not graphing that. Here, multiply through with the 6 first. 6c minus 6 is less than or equal to negative 18. Then add 6 to both sides. 6c is less than or equal to, we have a negative 18 and a positive 6. So we find the difference and keep the sign of the larger. The difference is 12 and the larger is the negative. Divide by 6 and we get c is less than or equal to negative 2. Again, what I divided by was a positive number, so I do not have to change the direction of my inequality. On this one, I have an m on both sides. So I am going to subtract 5m from both sides because it is currently positive and added to the 12. So the opposite of that would be subtracting. That will give me a negative 2m because I have a negative 5 and a positive 3 is greater than 12. Divide by negative 2. Since I am dividing by a negative number, I need to change the direction of my inequality, and I will get m is less than 6. On 36, I need to combine like terms first. I have a positive 1 and a negative 4, so that gives me a negative 3t. Divide by negative 3. T then would be greater than 3. Again, changing the direction of your inequality because you divided by a negative. If you multiply or divide by a negative number, you have to change the direction of your inequality. On 37, I'm going to add 4x to both sides because it is currently a minus 4x, and the opposite of that would be plus 4x. Now, you need to be careful on this because we have 4 and 0.5. So you've got to line up the decimals. So you're going to get 4.5x. Add 7, not 7, 2. 4.5x is greater than or equal to 9. Divide both sides by 4.5. I happen to know that 4.5 is half of 9, but if you don't know that, take your 9 and divide it by 4.5. You're going to need to move your decimal there and here. So you're going to put in a 0, and that would go in 2 times. 45 times 2 is 90. So x is greater than or equal to 2. On 38, I will add 6 to both sides first. That will give me negative 6/7 y is greater than or equal to 48. And then I will multiply both sides by negative 7/6. And then seeing what can cancel over here, all of that would drop to 1, leaving me with just the y. Over here, this is 48 over 1. 6 will go into 48 8 times. So I end up with y is less than or equal to. I need to change the direction of my inequality because I multiplied by a negative. And so 8 times negative 7 is negative 56. So y is less than or equal to negative 56. And then on 39, I am going to actually do a multiplication and get rid of this fraction. And the reason why I'm doing that and didn't do that here, in number 38, the only fraction was in front of the y. There was no other y. But here I have a variable in 2 places. And if I try and put those together, I'm going to have to deal with fractions in front of my variable. I don't want to deal with that. So what I'm going to do is multiply everything by 2. So here, 4 times, let me do my reducing. Nothing reduces here. 2 will go into 2 one time, and nothing reduces there. You can only reduce with denominators. So 2 times 4 is 8, plus 1 times x is x, greater than 2 times 2x would be 4x. I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides. That gives me 8 minus 3x is greater than 0. Subtract 8 from both sides. Negative 3x is greater than negative 8. 0 minus 8 is negative 8. Divide by negative 3. And we get x is less than 8/3. And we do need to change the direction of our inequality because we divided by a negative. And if I was going to graph that one, I would change my 8/3 to 2 2/3 so I could see the location. You know, like here's 2, here's 3, 2 2/3 would be right there. And so that's what that one would look like graphed. And then this last one, the first thing we need to do is the distributive property there. Multiply that 3 through. Then combine like terms. 3m, 9 plus 4 is 13. Then subtract 13 from both sides. 3n is less than or equal to 15 minus 13 is 2. And then divide by 3. And we get n is less than or equal to 2/3. And then these are word problems. Number 29 on page 244 says you have an allowance of $12. You buy a discount movie ticket that costs at least $3.50 and popcorn for $2.75. Write and solve an inequality to find out how much you have for other spending. So we'll say S. I don't like S. Looks like a 5. We saw X for other spending. So you've already spent $3.50. You've already spent $2.75. How much more, that's how much more can you spend and stay under your allowance amount, which was $12. So put the $3.50 and the $2.75 together, combining like terms. and we get 625. That is currently added to the x. It's positive. So I'm going to subtract 625 from both sides. And that will give me x has to be less than or equal to $5.75 when we do the subtraction. If you need to see the subtraction, here it is. I cannot subtract 5 from nothing, so I have to borrow. But I have nothing to borrow in this first position. So I'm going to borrow from that 12 and make it 11. This becomes 10. Then I can borrow from that and make it 9, and that becomes 10. Now I can subtract. 10 minus 5 is 5, 9 minus 2 is 7, 11 minus 6 is 5, and that's how I got that. So x has to be less than or equal to $5.75. Number 30 says, suppose that you earn $7.25 per hour working part-time at a florist. Write and solve an inequality for how many full hours you would have to work to earn at least 200. So we'll say H is the number of hours worked. You get $7.25 per hour. So 725 times H, and you want at least $200, so greater than or equal to 200. And so we're going to divide both sides by 725. So 200 divided by 725, we're going to need to move that decimal 2 places, which means we need to move it 2 places here and put in a couple of zeros. And let's try a 2 right here. 2 times 5 is 10, carry the 1. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 2 times 7 is 14. And then subtracting, I didn't mean to erase that. I was just trying to get rid of my little lines where I moved my decimal. We're going to get 550 and then bring down another 0. I think it'll go in 7 times. 7 times 5 is 35. Carry the 3. 7 times 2 is 14, and 3 is 17. Carry the 1. 49. 7 times 7 is 49, plus 1 is 50. I would have borrowed there and made that a 4, that a 10, a 9, and a 10. So this would be a 4. So 0.6. Maybe 5. Nope, 6 won't work. 6 is, because 6 times 7 is 42, and I would have some carried numbers. So it's going to be a 5. It really doesn't matter. It's more than 27. So H has to be greater than or equal to 27.5 something. But it says how many whole hours. So the answer is you have to work at least 28 hours in order to get that. Okay, page 246, number 38 says a freight elevator can safely hold no more than 2,000 pounds. An elevator operator takes 55-pound box to a storage area. If he weighs 55-pound boxes, if he weighs 165 pounds, how many boxes can he carry? So B is going to be the number of boxes. So we know the elevator can only hold 2,000 pounds. So whatever the weight adds up to, it has to be less than 2,000 pounds. But it's not just boxes plus his weight, because each box is 55 pounds. So I'm going to put 55 pounds in front of that, because 55 times the number of boxes will give me the weight of those boxes. So I'll subtract 165 and get 55B is less than or equal to 1835. And then take 1835 and divide it by 55. Okay, so it'll go in 3 times. 15, carry the 1. 15 plus 1 is 16. That would be an 8, 1, 85. So it'll go 3 times again. 20, 0, 3 times again. I'm going to stop because, oops, I didn't show that division. I end up with B has to be less than or equal to 33.3. These are boxes. You can't take a third of a box. So you have to take at most 33 boxes. So those are cases where when you solved the equation, you had to look and say, can I have a decimal? And no, you couldn't. Compound inequalities with an and, we have greater than -3, so an open circle at -3 and heading this way, but less than 2, so an open circle at 2 and heading this way. So what we get here is this trapped region between -3 and 2. Normally they will write an and like that. M is less than -2, so open circle at -2 and heading to the left. Again, your inequality matches the arrowhead. And then greater than or equal to 1. So a darkened dot at 1 because it's or equal to and an arrowhead going that way. This is an and situation. So we have a darkened dot at -3 because of that or equal to right there. And then an open circle at 4. And it is the trapped region in between those. These two come off of 249 or page 246. This is an or. They go in opposite directions. So x is less than or equal to -6 or x is greater than 2. And then number 30 is an and situation. To write these, you put your smaller number here, bigger number here. The inequality will always point that way. See, pointy part to the left. And you have to decide, do you need an or equal to or not? You do not because those are both open circles. And then your x goes in the middle. So that's how you set those up. Solving compound inequalities. You can do these where you can separate them into two different equations. I'll show you that. So you have that and z minus 1 is less than 3. So add 1 to both sides. Z is less than 4. Add 1 to both sides. And we get z is greater than or equal to -2. And then you would put them back together. I tend to just do it right here. And I remember that I have actually basically two inequalities here. So whatever I do in the middle, I have to do on both sides. So I get -2 and 4. So I got the same thing. I'm going to subtract 1/2 from both sides, or from all three sides, because I have that. So -2 minus 2.5, or minus a half. They're both negative, so I get -2.5. Here I get D, 4.5 is positive, the half is negative, so 4.5 minus a half would just be 4. And then I just bring my inequalities down. And here it was -2 less than or equal to z less than 4. And I have to graph these. So darken dot at 2, open circle at 4. How did I darken dot at -2.5, open circle at 4. 46 is another and, again showing you that as two separate equations and then doing it together. I would divide by -8. That's going to give me 0. I need to change the direction of my inequality. Divide by -8. Change the direction of my inequality. 12 over -8 is Those are both divisible by 4, so negative 3 over 2, which is negative 1.5. And then here, divide by negative 8, divide by negative 8, divide by negative 8. Again, I have whatever I do, I got to do on both sides of that inequality. So this would be 0. I have to change the direction of my inequality, change the direction of my inequality. And then this one you would need to rewrite because we always write the smaller number on the left. And you'll notice in between here and here, it opened up to the b and it was an or equal to. So it opens up to the b and it's an or equal to. And in between the b and the 0, the pointy part was towards the b. So that's me rewriting it. So I have a darkened dot at negative 1.5, which is between 1 and 2, and an open circle at 0. So that's a very small little section there. On this one, I have an or. So this one's already in 2 sentences. And so we would have t is less than or equal to 2, or divide by 7. T is greater than or equal to 7. So when you write this, you need that or in there. So less than or equal to 2, darkened dot at 2, going this way, greater than or equal to 7, darkened dot at 7, going that way. I'm going to do this one in place. So I have 3a. 4 plus 8 is 12. Negative 2, positive 8, the signs are different. Find the difference, keep the sign of the larger. Then divide everything by 3. I get 2 is less than or equal to a less than 4. So I have a darkened dot at 2 and an open circle at 4, and it's that trapped region. And again, I used a darkened dot with the 2 because of this or equal to right there. The 4 did not have that. And just inserting a visual correction right here. When I graphed this initially, it was too small for me to see that I had hit negative 2 instead of positive 2. It's a much smaller region. It should look like that. Subtract 4 from both sides. This is an or. So 3n is greater than or equal to negative 3 because I have a negative 4 and a positive 1. Signs are different. Subtract and keep the sign of the larger. So I have n is greater than or equal to negative 1. I did not change the direction of the inequality because I didn't divide by a negative. On this one, I do divide by a negative, so I need to change the direction of the inequality. So n is less than negative 5 or greater than or equal to negative 1. So that's what your graph looks like. So that is your graph for there. And then absolute value equations. Absolute value, remember, is distance, so it can be on either side of 0. So we just take the guts of the absolute value, set it equal to the number, or the guts of the absolute value equals the negative number. And so that is actually your solution to that one. You don't need to do any other calculations. On this one, k minus 8 is equal to, so the guts of the absolute value equals the number. There is no or on this because there is no negative 0. So add 8 to both sides and we get k equals 8. On this one, when you see that an absolute value is set equal to 0, that is like asking you what distance is or is equal to a number less than 0, a negative number. Absolute values can't be negative. They're distances. They're always positive. But it has to be an absolute value by itself, not an absolute value with something. So be aware that you have isolated on the absolute value. So on 63, the first thing I need to do is isolate on my absolute value. So I get absolute value of r plus 2 is equal to 3. Then I take the guts of the absolute value is equal to the number, or the guts of the absolute value is equal to negative the number. Subtract 2 from both sides, r equals 1, or subtract 2 from both sides, r equals negative 5. So r equals 1 or negative 5. Here I'm going to divide by 4 first to isolate on that absolute value. So I get the absolute value of 5 minus t equals 5. So I take the guts of the absolute value equals the number, or the guts of the absolute value equals the negative number. Subtract 5 from both sides. That 5 is negative, or is positive because there's no sign there. The t is negative though. So 5 minus 5 over here would be 0. Minus 5, we get negative t equals negative 10. Divide by negative 1, t still equals 0. Divide by negative 1, t equals 10. So t is equal to 0 or 10. And then finally, with absolute value inequalities, I gave you a reminder that when we have a less than, we're going to use an and. And if we have a greater than, we're going to use an or. So land and gore. So here's a greater than, so I'm going to use an or. So I take the guts of the absolute value. It is isolated on the absolute value, by the way. So guts of the absolute value greater than or equal to the number, or guts of the absolute value. Change the direction of your inequality and change the sign of your answer. Now solve. N is greater than or equal to 2. Subtract 2. N is less than or equal to negative 6. So n is greater than or equal to 2, or n is less than or equal to negative 6. A less than, so I'm going to use an and. I am isolated on my absolute value, so here I start. Guts of the absolute value less than or equal to 15, and guts of the absolute value, change the direction of the inequality, change the sign of your answer. Divide by negative 5. X is greater than or equal to negative 3. I changed the direction of my inequality there because I divided by a negative. X is less than or equal to positive 3. So this is a trapped region between 3, negative 3, and 3. And they both have or equals to on them. Number 56, I'm isolated on my absolute value. It's a less than, so I'm going to use an M. Guts of the absolute value, less than 4.8. And guts of the absolute value, change the direction of your inequality, change the sign of your answer. I am going to multiply both sides by 2. So I get M is less than 9.6. Multiply both sides by 2. And I get M is greater than negative 9.6. And these are connected with an and. So smaller number, bigger number, variable in the middle, point always goes that way. And there is no or equal to on those. In number 57, we first have to get rid of this negative 1 and isolate on our absolute value. So the first thing I'm going to do is add 1 to both sides. That's going to give me 2x minus 7 inside the absolute value. We haven't dropped it yet. Is greater than 1. Since it's a greater than, I'm going to use an or statement. So I guts of the absolute value greater than 1, just what's already there. Or guts of the absolute value, change the direction of the inequality, change the sign of your number. Here I will add 7 to both sides. I will get 2x is greater than 8. Divide by 2. X is greater than 4. Here add 7 to both sides. That 7 is positive, the 1 is negative, so that's going to be a positive 6. Divide by 2, and we get x is less than 3. So we have x is less than 3 or x is greater than 4. And then our final two, for number 19 on page 246, we have a greater than. We are isolated on our absolute value, so I don't have to worry about that first. We have a greater than, so we're going to connect these with an or. So we separate them into two inequalities, greater than or equal to 3, or guts of the absolute value, change the direction of the inequality, change the sign of the answer. I wrote my guts down wrong. Add 5. We get x is greater than or equal to 8. Add 5. The 5 and 3 are opposite signs, so we will find the difference and keep the sign of the larger. And these are connected with an or. And here we are isolated on our absolute value, so we can go right into our statements. We have an and, so we have a less than, so we're going to use an and. So guts of the absolute value less than 5, and guts of the absolute value, change the direction of the inequality, change the sign of the answer. Subtracting 1 from both sides and dividing by 2, we get h is less than 2. Subtracting 1 from both sides over here, the 5 and 1 are both negative, so we add them and keep the sign. Then divide by 2. H is greater than -3, so we are going to write this as an and statement. Smaller number, larger number, H in the middle, pointy always goes to the left. There is no or equal to.